have it with it leaders like Kit Nascimento, who was on the executive of the PSC and a communication specialist there. At the time, the chairman of the PSC was Captain Jerry Gavaya, who had done when it comes to security and governance matters within the organization, he has been handling that very well for a number of years prior, and he really put a lot of focus and effort into the observation mission for the PSC to observe the 2020 elections. Coming back to your direct question, that period of uncertainty was huge because not only did local businesses feel uncomfortable, foreign businesses who were looking at Guyana as an investment destination also felt uncomfortable. So all around the board, across the business community, foreign and local, everybody kind of froze for that period.
Thanks for that, Nicholas. Rion, I know shortly after all of this, well, I shouldn't even say shortly, it's been 5 months, but we saw President Mohamed Irfan Ali being sworn in as the 9th executive president of Guyana. What were your feelings like at that moment as he was taking the oath of office? I want to ask.
Well, on that day, I think all of Guyana could have breathed a sign of relief because leading up to that day, Guyana was put through a lot. We had 5 organizing months. The level of uncertainty was huge. Every morning leading up to that, the actual day of His Excellency being sworn in, every morning you wake up with this level of uncertainty. With there is no clear direction of where our country was heading. Our democracy was on the verge of being totally eroded. So indeed, that day, it was a feeling of renewed hope. Well, to me, and I guess most other Guyanese, we as Guyanese could have actually breathed a sign of relief, knowing that our country was back on course to into democracy and continual progress.
Thanks for that. And of course, it's a journey. We had that turmoil, we had the uncertainty, President Ali taking the oath of office, and then in just 100 days, we saw progress in critical areas under the leadership of this PPPC government. In a nutshell, I want to ask all of you, what are some of the success stories that you're most proud of? Perhaps you can start to Duke it.
I think that what is most important of all is the declared determination by President Ali that we must unite this country going forward. As you know, I have been in politics for a long time.
Yes.
And I was a member of a cabinet at the time when this country was threatened by international invasion. And parties in those days saw Guyana as either going forward as a democracy or becoming a dictatorship. And that's what influenced a great deal that took place then. But even before then, as a British colony, the British used the tactic of divide and conquer. They kept this country carefully divided between the descendants of slave labor which was used by the British to begin the development of this country, and indentured labor when slavery was finally abolished. To replace the slave labor, but indentured labor from India, well, from Madeira, first of all, my heritage, China and India, were brought as an academic form of slavery. It was slavery under a different name. And it was important for the British, I think, they saw it that way, to keep the country divided. And they used ethnic heritage and race to keep it so. And it has remained so until this time. And it is, in my personal view, I speak for nobody in particular in this regard, it is the biggest challenge that any government in this country that wishes to really unite the country, take it forward with every Guyanese understanding that they have a share in its development. Until that begins to happen, until we cross that racial divide and see ourselves fundamentally as who we are. And who are we? We're Guyanese. We're born, we're bred here. Our destiny remains here. Even those who leave see their final years back in Guyana. Until we recognize that, until the country comes together and understands that, we meet a serious challenge. And President Ali is the first president that I know that has stood up and recognized that openly and frankly. And that, I believe, is why he is committed to this, what he calls one Guyana. So if that, to my mind, is the most important aspect of where this government under Ali intends to go.
Thanks for that. What about you, Rion? Would you like to add?
Well, I would want to partially agree with Kit because over those 5 months in particular, our cohesiveness as a nation would have eroded significantly. And the fact that with the swearing of His Excellency President Ali, we would have seen Guyana having a president who genuinely wants to bring the people together and who understands that Guyana cannot develop in parts, meaning that every village, every region, every community must benefit from the development of our country. And this was certainly absent in a big way in the previous administration, where we would have seen community feel neglected and so on. So I think that in itself is a good move in bringing our people together. Let all Guyanese can feel as though and believe that they are part of the development of our country, because generally speaking, all of us as Guyanese have a role to play in the development of our country. And as we might know, that our country will develop much faster if we unite as one Guyana, if we unite as one people with one destiny. So we are being led in this direction by no other than His Excellency the President. And I believe this is enough for all of us as Guyana to come on board and work for our country.
Thanks, Rion. Nicholas?
I think the premise of your question was what do we think was successful? If I could roll that question back, because the title of your program, I would like to answer a question where what do I think was successful for the country after that 5-month period? I think our election laws, I think our court system were successful. In other words, in pure political science theory, there's this separation of powers doctrine. And clearly you saw the executive at the time exerting a pressure or influence, even though it was claimed as not. Those of us who were witnessing what was going on, I even had some of the information from our observers that I was reviewing this morning. It's clear that the executive at the time was influencing the Elections Commission from an operational level. But our court system showed its independence, our judicial system showed its independence, and I think that is a huge success for the country. That we saw that independence, that we saw the upholding of our electoral laws. What that period showed us was the gaps in our electoral laws where reforms can address and strengthen so that as you said in your title there, never again. But overall, I think we came out successful. Not the speed we would have wanted to come out successful, but we did come out successful as a country.
Yeah, thanks for that. When we think about government right now, we see a more inclusive government, a government that is reaching people across the country, tapping into the private sector. We just concluded the debates or budget 2021 yesterday. And of course, the private sector had a part to play in contributions towards crafting this budget. So we see a different approach and a more cohesive approach to that One Guyana. So my question in terms of inclusion, we could perhaps start with you, Nicholas. How has that been with this government, overall?
No, certainly, the government has definitely been amenable to the views of the private sector, and in its emergency budget, it was accused of the government's then emergency budget was accused of being a private sector budget, and if that was a private sector budget, I can't imagine what the label for this one would be. Look, the private sector of Guyana wants to build both itself within Guyana, the local private sector, and of course now it's going to be a growing private sector of both local companies as well as foreign companies. But we also want to build our nation in totality, because the economy of Guyana includes us, but includes government as well. I don't look at it that government is on one side of a fence and we're on the other. We're all part of Guyana, one Guyana, to take the term. So we need to work together to build Guyana. So I'm happy that government has also shown the same sort of thought process by listening to our suggestions, making that input into the budget, and allowing us to work together to develop this country. Because government by itself cannot be the only employer in the country. Government needs the private sector that is flourishing to help hit its employment targets and to help hit its growth targets. And we're here to work with them as partners.
Thanks. Rion?
Well, certainly by action, you can know that this government is one that really regards the view of every citizen in this country, because not only consultation was not only done with the private sector, but consultation was done at all levels, even at the community level. So, because government believes that if you're going to govern for the people, you must be in tune with the needs of the people, because only then you can genuinely better the lives of the people. So, as by action, we all know that this government is one that believes in the views of the people, believe in consultation, and believe in engaging Guyana as it is.
Thanks for that. Kit, would you like to add anything to that?
Not really. I think you got the answer that you were looking for.
Okay.
I think what's most important, you asked me, or you opened this discussion with asking what went wrong. Well, what went wrong is still wrong. It needs to be fixed. What went wrong is, though our court system prevailed, as Nicholas pointed out, our election commission went wrong. And it's still there. Untouched so far. And that needs to be fixed. We've adopted the title of these discussions, Never Again. What does that mean? It means never again must a political party in power be able to manipulate the election system in order to keep themselves in power, regardless of the will of the people. And the capacity for doing that remains. If we are to seriously move forward, we have to address the problem of GCOM. And I believe that the government is determined to do that. We have local government elections to be held this year. The government has already made a public commitment to the holding of those elections. And the Attorney General has also made a public commitment to reforming GCOM. But you cannot have an elections commission which can be manipulated in the manner that it was by the government of the day to keep a party in power that lost an election. So it's my position that the legal aspects of GCOM need to be very quickly, very seriously addressed. The constitutional makeup of GCOM needs to be addressed so that no party in power can manipulate the election machinery the way it was done, and which led to the 5 months of this country being on the verge of becoming what was intended to be by the Granger government, a military dictatorship. In fact, I brought a commentary along with me that I made on the 29th of June last year, television commentary I did. And I thought I would use this opportunity to just quote a few paragraphs.
Sure.
Because I said then that we must recognize what and who these men and women are in their determination to steal the March 2nd elections. Because the same men and women remain sitting in Parliament and remain in charge of the opposition party. And I called them. I said, these are men and women who are conniving, ruthless, ignorant, and criminal in their intent. They do not care for the consequences of their actions. They do not care for the rule of law. They do not care for what the courts rule or do not rule. That is the nature that obtains still in place in the leadership of the opposition party. And that is why the president has to reach beyond them, has to reach directly to the people of this country. Because throughout that 5 months, the PNC betrayed its own people by leading them to believe that they had won an election which they had lost. And the PNC seemed, with some exceptions I've noted within the PNC, but at the level of the leader of the opposition, Mr. Harman, still determined to divide the country, to mislead their supporters, to continue with the big lie that they won the election. They are doing what is legally correct in filing petitions. They will lose those petitions. But in the meantime, while they remain contested in court, rather like Mr. Trump in the US, they continue to repeat the big lie. The truth is that they lost the election. They refuse to recognize that truth. And until they do, it is extremely difficult for the governing party to reach out to that kind of opposition. And that is why the president is reaching beyond them. He's reaching directly to the people of this country. It is extremely important, therefore, that in order to avoid what happened, and to be certain that it never happens again, we have to begin where the problem fundamentally lies, and that is reorganizing and re-legislating the construction, format, and the makeup of GCOM. And I believe that needs to be a priority now of the government.
Yeah. If I may, I just want for us to go back for the 5 months. The international community, we were on spotlight around the world for, these elections and what was happening. So I want us to have a contrast at that point, in that 5 months, what the perception of the international community was for Guyana and where it is now. If you can share your thoughts on that, where we are now, how the international community sees us, but versus to that 5 month where they saw us.
Well, we were in the danger of becoming a pariah internationally. Had the Granger government succeeded in establishing a dictatorship in this country, we would have been isolated completely internationally. Our economy would have been destroyed. We would have had virtually no future. It didn't happen. Democracy prevailed. Today, we see and I'm sure Nicholas will attest to this, investors scrambling to come into this country and put their money in it. We are recognized as a country with an enormous future ahead of us by the people who invest their money to create employment, to build a country. It comes, in fact, from private investment. And already this government is being seen as doing the job a government is supposed to do. And that is to create the conditions for investment to succeed and flourish and provide employment, provide good wages, provide the conditions that make the country develop. I've heard the criticism that we all have, that this is a private sector budget. And what, may I ask, is wrong with that? We are an open market economy. If the private sector fails, the country fails. It is the government's job, as this budget is already beginning to do, to make it possible for investment to flourish, so that the government can tax that development, can provide the infrastructure, can build the roads, can provide the public services, bring down the cost of electricity, provide water where there wasn't any water before. Do those things that governments are required to do. And governments can do that best when the economy flourishes. I think I've said enough.
What about you, Rian?
Pointing to your question directly, whatever occurred in this country exactly a year ago and thereafter occurred in full view of the world. The world saw the way Guyana and Guyanese were treated by the then Granger administration directly after the elections of March 2nd, 2020. The world saw that as a people, we were heading in a direction where our democracy was quickly being eroded. We were heading in a direction where the people of this country would have possibly suffered by the actions of a selfish government. Certainly, the Guyanese people didn't deserve to be treated like that. Because on March the 2nd, 2020, Guyanese came out in their numbers. They exercised a right that afforded them in the constitution of this country. And that is for them to come out and elect a government of their choice. There's nothing wrong. So certainly the agonizing 5 months that followed, Guyanese certainly did not deserve that. We must remain grateful to those that stood by Guyana, that supported Guyana and Guyanese, to ensure that as a country we remain in the path of being a democracy, that we maintain our respect as Guyanese. Because back then, we all aware that there were talks of sanctions and other actions. Guyanese, by nature, we're good people. We're decent people. And we believe that all of us should be treated in a manner that is deserving of decent people. So, as I said before, as Guyanese, we must remain grateful to every individual, whether foreigners or local, that supported our country and ensuring rather that today we can still sit and have this conversation as a democracy. I'm quite confident that in the sight of all, in the sight of the world, we're certainly in a better place now than we were during those 5 months and before. So I hope this should answer your question of how I believe we're seen by the world then and now.
Thanks for that, Rihanna. Nicholas, would you like to add?
Right. So I would say that, let's separate a couple of things, yeah? I don't think the perception of the world on Guyanese people, from my learned friend's comments, it's exactly as he said. We are perceived to be friendly, open, kind people, and welcoming of foreigners, foreign investment, and as well as promoting our own and having pride in our people. But our administration and our country as an investment destination, that image was, it almost did a flip-flop. Going into the March 2nd election, I was not chairman of the Private Sector Commission. Captain Gavaya was. I was president of the Chamber of Commerce. Both Captain and I, had seen a number of foreign investors heavily interested in investing in the country prior to March 2nd. And everybody said, okay, we're going to wait to see what happens in the elections, not because they were concerned who was going to be the winner. They were concerned that, okay, in a Latin American country in an election period, usually you want to wait until the post-election period to make your investment decisions and then pull the trigger to say, okay, we want to set up offices, we want to hire staff, etc. Then you started to get the let's say, the curiosities. I don't know if you remember the events as they unfolded. You had everything from Mr. Mingo being sick to suddenly Mr. Mingo being resurrected and trying to make his declaration, even though they had not done the proper counting of Region 4 SOPs. There was the spreadsheet and flash drive incident, which the police were called into. These are things that are important. When those start to get out to the international news, you had Jason Carter of the Carter Center. He gave some comments to the press, and all this got into the international news. When that hit the international news, every investor, and I spoke to international media at the time. We would talk. You can see articles quoting us on Bloomberg, New York Times. There was German media following the elections. There was The Economist. following the elections. These are international, major international publications. Then, of course, you had the foreign missions here, as well as the observer groups, right? So, when you think about the size of the EU, when you think about the size of the Commonwealth, right? And they're following this information. So this information that they're looking at these events unfolding, the information is going back to the foreign offices, as well as to the investors who are looking at the country. And that mood for both groupings of the international investors as well as the rest of the world community or the international community, the mood went from extremely positive to straight off a cliff. As the former Prime Minister of Jamaica, Bruce Golden, said, he said he's never seen a more transparent attempt to steal an election, right? It was clear for everybody. The only persons who still think they saw what they saw is the now opposition, right? Everybody else saw what they saw for what it was, including the international investors. And they were not about to put their money behind a country that was going into dictatorship, because they've seen examples of what happens when that happens. When these states are isolated, when sanctions are placed on them, and as Kit alluded to, their economies are destroyed. So your investment would be at huge risk. So everybody pulled back and was waiting. I've never seen that much international attention on the domestic affairs of Guyana since I have been doing business in Guyana from about 2010. So it was really a critical moment. And now that we were able to have democracy prevail, that mood swung from extreme negativity to investing in Guyana to extreme positivity. And in spite of COVID, we've seen a heavy presence of international investors looking to invest in Guyana, and that is promulgated by the information that is being shared from the foreign missions here to their home countries, so that it gets into their home private sectors. And so it has really been a complete turnaround from the low point where we were on the precipice of a dictatorship.
Thanks for that, Nicholas. I think March the 2nd will forever be in our history. It's not something that we can wipe out, because we cannot forget what happened on that day. And, Kit, you mentioned never again. How do we ensure that this never happens again? So as we're coming down to program time, I want to ask that question. I know you mentioned you have to start where it began at GCOM. But for you, Nicholas and Rion, what do you think we need to do so that this never happens again? Not only as from a government perspective, but from Guyanese. What should Guyanese do to ensure that this never occurs again in our history? Perhaps you can start with you, Nicholas.
So I'm going to first answer succinctly and then build on that answer. Electoral reform. That's the key. Because the Carter Price formula was set up for a particular context when it was set up for that context. Our underlying political conditions have changed, and the Carter Price formula no longer works for a selection. Because everything that happened on March 2nd didn't, as Kit alluded to in his remarks, it didn't start on March 2nd. It started with an illegal appointment of a GCOM chair in the retired Justice James Patterson, right? It was built up in, let's say, cronyism in selecting who works in the operational parts of GCOM. That's what built up to March 2nd. And to prevent that, we need to ensure that what we have is a strong, transparent, and a elections commission that is committed to the Constitution and the people of Guyana, not to the government of Guyana or even to the opposition of Guyana. Right? The Elections Commission is a creature for the people of Guyana to give their will for who they want to administrate the country. And so electoral reform is the key.
Rian.
Yes, I want to support my colleague here because I think there must be massive strengthening of our election laws. Because as it is, the present arrangement of GCOM certainly doesn't enjoy the confidence of majority of Guyanese, having experienced what occurred before and even after March 2nd, 2020. So I believe our election laws needs to be strengthened massively, where as a country, as a people, we can hold our the staff of that election body accountable, and there must be strong penalties in place that would want to deter anybody that even think of attempting such action in the future. Because we need to ensure that we have election machinery that is only loyal to the people and the constitution of this country, and not to any political party, no political party. Because we are all aware that by way of actions, the secretariat that presided over the elections of March 2nd, 2020 was either hijacked or can consider an annex of a political party. And that should never be. The power to elect a government of this country should solely and solely lies with the people and not the election machinery, not GCOM. So that's the first thing. We need to ensure that we safeguard that right that is catered for in the Constitution for our people. The right to elect a government lies with the people and not with GCOM. So we need to protect the rights, that right that has been given to our people by strengthening our election laws. And I believe that's the only way we can even attempt to ensuring that whatever occur in 2020 after the elections doesn't occur again in this country.
Thanks for that, Rian. I know, Kate, you would have mentioned your bit, but is there anything else you'd like to add at this time?
Well, I'm very pleased that the government has committed to a commission of inquiry into what took place. And I'm also pleased that they are committed to an independent commission of inquiry. That would probably mean a commission of inquiry that is mounted with an international presence in it. That's critical because that will identify clearly and without further dispute what went wrong, why it went wrong, and what needs fixing. That will reveal the best approach to electoral reform, because you have to identify clearly, and that inquiry should do that, precisely how the Election Commission got politically manipulated, because that is exactly what happened. That will also result in the fundamental revision of the entire electoral machinery and its establishment in a manner that keeps it free of political intervention and political interference. As Nicholas pointed out, the Carter formula was for a special set of circumstances and at a special time. It no longer works. It's not relevant to today, and it must go. So ultimately, in another 5 years, unless the government wishes to call the election before then, we must be assured that the next time this country goes to the polls, and actually it's not another 5 years, it's within a year, because the local government elections have to be contested in the same way that national elections are contested. So really, we have a short time span ahead of us for all of this to take place. It has to happen this year. And I believe the government is committed to that happening.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kit. And, you know, as we wrap up today's program, President Ali announced earlier that Medal of Democracy that will affect a couple persons, Guyanese also, you know, who really stood up for this country in that time. So as we remember March 2nd, 2020, your final comments on today and our program, Assault on Democracy, Never Again. Perhaps we start with you, Kit.
Well, I saw today the President's announcement. I think it is an excellent award and recognition of those who went the extra mile, many extra miles, to fight for the ultimate retention of democracy in this country. It's clear that, and we've all recognized it here, that the way forward for our country, especially with the enormous opportunity that the oil and gas discoveries provide for us, it's clear that while this country can become great financially, it is equally important that it must go forward as a democracy. Because one really is dependent on the other. And that ultimately the will of the people must prevail.
Thanks for that, Keith. Rian?
Thank you. As I would have said before, that we as Guyanese and as a country needs to remain grateful to those that would have contributed to us remaining a democracy to this day. So I would want to applaud the announcement by His Excellency the President, and I believe that those particularly 5 months would have really demonstrated our resilience as a people, and it would have also highlighted true patriotism as it relates to those persons that would have, Guyanese of course, who would have stood up and stand for our beloved country.
Thanks for that. Nicholas?
I'll talk about two things in my closing comments. The first is that, you know, as Kid is saying, the strength of our country, indeed our motto, one people, one nation, one destiny, is in its people. And us being able to go to the polls to elect the government of our choice in a democratic election is important because it creates competition between political parties to do what is right for the people. If you take away that competition and governments feel entitled to being in power, then you remove their desire to serve the people, because then they can't be held accountable. An election is a way of holding our leaders accountable to the man on the street, or the woman on the street, to be politically correct, because it gives those people power to decide who their leader is going to be. And it's very important that that be sacrosanct. No matter where you are in the political divide, no matter which party you support, that is sacrosanct, because that competition means that the party who will deliver the best for the country and administrate in the best way will win. And the parties who want to compete in a democratically election, compete to be democratically elected, they will do the right things to continue to win. Right? So that's the first piece. The second piece is, on March 2nd, really Guyanese went to the polls, voted, and went home and awaited the count, and then eventually the recount. There's a number of unsung heroes who did things overtly as well as behind the scenes to guide the country back onto a path of democracy. And, those heroes, I want to thank them, because without them, I remember the despair that I felt when I saw what was happening and unfolding in front of my eyes. And you realize that, as a businessman and as an investor in my own country, that everything you worked hard for could be taken from you overnight. Because even though people didn't know it, when you become a pariah state, one of the first things that happens is you get inflation because of your currency, right? You would experience an extreme depreciation in your currency. So everything you imported, right, would go up in price quickly. There are different economic reasons for the depreciation, but it is a fact that you would have experienced a depreciation. Overnight, as a population, we would have experienced a loss in wealth, a loss in purchasing power parity, right? And we would have been poorer. In other words, we depend on a lot of imported material currently, and we wouldn't have been able to purchase that imported material with the same amount of, whether it's rice, grain, sugar. If you take how much tons of sugar it takes us to convert into a certain amount of US dollars, and how much oil, let's say, refined diesel, that US dollars buys us, that would have changed. And that despair only turned around when we got the legitimate results of the election, right? And for me, I looked at a number of groups and individuals doing what they had to do behind the scenes, and it was really a true coming together, because I saw people who are not supporters of President Ali's government, but they are supporters of the country, because at the end of the day, they want the right thing for the country, and everybody joined forces to say, whether we supported before March 2nd, a PPP-led party and an Irfan Ali-led potential government, we support our country. And our country was more important to us than any sort of personal political views. And there could be no higher mark of patriotism than that. And that, I want to thank a lot of those heroes who helped put aside any sort of personal feelings and worked in the interests of Guyana.
Thank you so much for that, Nicholas, and thank you all so much for appearing this morning on this panel discussion. And, as we reflect on the assault on democracy just last year, and we ensure that it never happens again. It makes me think about the budget 2021, the theme it was launched under, and where our country is headed. And it says that pathway to recovery, economic dynamism, and resilience. So with those words in mind, thank you also to our listeners and viewers of this program. And be with us for the rest of the day. We have much more coming your way. Thanks for joining us.